In April of 1906, when the earthquake that would kill over 3,000 people had finished its work in San Francisco, the city's Chinatown district lay in ruins across roughly 20 blocks. But what happened next reveals something the official record has consistently obscured. The debris wasn't cleared in the standard way. It was burned, systematically, methodically, and with specific institutional oversight that left a trail of orders but no explanation for the orders themselves. And buried beneath what had collapsed were foundations that predated the structures built on top of them by decades, some by more than a century. Foundations that suggested something existed in that location before anyone recorded it in the archives that still survive. The earthquake struck at 5:12 in the morning on April 18th. The initial rupture ran along the San Andreas Fault for roughly 300 miles, but the damage concentrated itself most severely in San Francisco's core. Chinatown, occupying roughly 12 city blocks in the northeast section, experienced some of the most catastrophic structural failure in the entire city. Buildings that had stood for 40, 50, even 60 years collapsed into rubble that rose in some places 15 feet high. Workers began the immediate salvage operation within hours. But here is where the conventional narrative becomes incomplete. Standard earthquake demolition involved clearing debris systematically, sorting salvageable materials, wood, metal, stone, and disposing of rubble in designated areas. Insurance adjusters needed to examine foundation damage. Structural engineers needed to assess what could be rebuilt. That process in every other damaged district in San Francisco took months. In Chinatown, it took 9 days. On April 27, 1906, 9 days after the earthquake, city official James D. Phelan issued an order authorizing controlled fires throughout the Chinatown district. The stated reason was preventing disease. Rubble, he argued, harbored infection. Heat would sterilize the debris field. But that explanation encounters immediate complications. First, by April 27th, the immediate crisis was already resolved. The fires that started from ruptured gas lines during the initial earthquake had burned themselves out. The danger of uncontrolled fire spreading to adjacent neighborhoods was past. Second, San Francisco's other destroyed neighborhoods, the Mission District, the Financial District, areas where buildings collapsed into identical rubble fields, were being cleared and salvaged without burning. No order was issued to sterilize those rubble fields through fire. Only Chinatown received this specific treatment. The burning began on the morning of April 28th and continued for 11 days. Workers brought kerosene and oil. They built pyres systematically through the district. Contemporary accounts describe smoke visible from the bay for the entire duration. One observer, a journalist named William Stout, who was documenting reconstruction efforts, noted in his daily account that the fires seemed organized with unusual precision. Not haphazard. Not desperate containment efforts. Structured, he wrote, and his notes survive in the San Francisco Public Library, that fires were kindled in patterns that moved methodically from the western edge of the district eastward, as if following a predetermined route. That detail appears nowhere in the official city reports compiled 6 months later. But here is the element that changes the investigation entirely. When the rubble was cleared after the fires had finished, and this is documented in the salvage company's logs, which are archived but rarely cited, workers discovered structural elements beneath the collapsed buildings that shouldn't have been there. Foundation stones carved with symbols that didn't appear on any architectural blueprints for those buildings. Masonry work in styles inconsistent with the structures built above them. At least 40 separate locations showed this pattern. Foundations existing beneath foundations. Evidence of occupancy or construction predating the recorded history of those parcels by anywhere from 40 to possibly 120 years. A salvage crew supervisor named Thomas Brennan filed a report on May 19, 1906. It's 37 pages long and exists in the San Francisco Public Library's archive section, though it's rarely requested, and contains no index markers, making it easy to find. Brennan noted that his crew discovered carved stone at 11 different sites, stone bearing marks inconsistent with modern masonry work. He noted that in 7 cases. These foundations extended beneath what blueprints identified as bedrock, meaning whoever laid these foundations had dug deeper than the buildings they supposedly supported should have required. He noted that in 6 cases, the stones themselves bore markings that appeared intentional but weren't architectural, more like markings made by implements predating standardized masonry tools. He recommended that city engineers examine the sites before complete clearance. His recommendation was not acted upon. By June 10th, all excavation and examination of the foundation sites had ceased. All remaining debris in those areas was classified as cleared and the land reassigned for reconstruction. The timing of that cessation deserves examination, because on June 9th, one day before excavation stopped entirely, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors issued a second order. This one is striking in its specificity and its language. It forbade any further systematic examination or documentation of subsurface structural elements in the Chinatown reconstruction zone. Not forbade removal or demolition, forbade examination, forbade documentation. The order came without explanation attached. No public statement accompanied it. It simply appeared in the official minutes, sandwiched between 2 routine zoning decisions, written in the passive voice so that no specific person is identified as having authored it. When historians later examined the supervisor's individual papers and archives, including the papers of every supervisor serving in 1906, not a single personal letter, memo, or note addressed the reasoning behind that order. The order existed. The reasoning for the order vanished completely. But something survives that order wasn't meant to suppress. Brennan had made copies of his initial report, multiple copies. One went to the Board of Supervisors as required. One went to his employer, the salvage company. And one copy, apparently kept for his personal records, survived because it was stored in a private family collection. That copy ended up, through donation in 1987, in the North Beach Historical Society, a small local museum with limited resources and minimal public visibility. The report survived not because of institutional preservation, but because one man decided to keep a record for reasons he never explicitly stated. That report's most significant pages are the ones documenting what lay beneath the structures. Brennan's crew found evidence of fire in several of the deepest foundations. Ash layers, charred wood, burned stone showing heat damage consistent with intentional burning conducted long before the 1906 earthquake. He noted the depths where this burned material appeared, anywhere from 8 to 14 feet below the surface of the parcels. This burning predated the structures above by multiple decades at minimum. He noted one location on Grant Avenue where the layering was particularly clear. Burned foundation at depth. Ash layer approximately 3 feet thick. Then compacted soil. Then modern construction, beginning at what would have been street level in roughly 1850, suggesting burning occurred sometime before that. There is a second witness to some of this evidence. Charles Crocker, the grandson of the famous railroad magnate, was overseeing reconstruction efforts in the financial district for a private investment group. His personal diary, which is housed at UC Berkeley, but again rarely consulted for this period, contains entries from late May 1906 that reference conversations with Brennan. Crocker wrote on May 22nd that he had spoken with the salvage supervisor who was discovering troubling things beneath Chinatown. Crocker noted that Brennan had shown him architectural drawings of some of the carved stones. Crocker wrote that the style was inconsistent with everything he understood about Chinatown's recorded history. Then Crocker wrote something more significant. He wrote that someone in city government has made clear that this inquiry is not desired. He noted this happened suddenly, between May 9th and May 10th, a shift from cooperation to what he called institutional silence. That 2-day window aligns precisely with the Board of Supervisors order issued on June 9th, suggesting there was a decision being made in the days immediately preceding. Here is what the archaeological evidence suggests. When you examine the layering documented in Brennan's report and the architectural details he recorded, the burned foundations beneath Chinatown buildings represent evidence of at least one significant fire that occurred in that location before the earthquake, before the recorded settlement of that area, possibly decades before American occupation of the space. Whether that fire was accidental, whether it was intentional, whether it was related to some earlier use of the land that required burial, and forgetting none of that can be established from the available evidence. But what is clear is that the 1906 burning, the systematic fires authorized by Phelan and documented in contemporary accounts, served a second function beyond disease prevention. It obscured the archaeological evidence of earlier burning. It destroyed whatever remaining traces might have answered questions about what happened beneath that ground before the documented city was built. The suppression of Brennan's report suggests that someone in city government understood the significance of what he had found. Not just suppression of the report itself, which was limited and only partially successful, but suppression of follow-up investigation, suppression of the examination that would have answered what lay beneath. The order forbidding systematic examination was extraordinarily precise language. Not forbidding all work, forbidding systematic work, forbidding documented work. The distinction matters because it allowed other work to continue informally, without records, without oversight. Which means someone with authority recognized that the questions being raised by what lay beneath the surface needed to be buried deeper than the earthquake had already buried them. One detail from Brennan's report, documented in his sketch of the Grant Avenue site, shows something remarkable. The carved stone from that location bore a mark repeated 3 times. Not an initial, not a mason's mark in any recognized system. 3 lines arranged in a pattern that suggested intentionality but had no match in any documented Chinatown architectural tradition. Brennan drew this mark carefully. He noted it multiple times. He wondered in writing whether it represented some kind of identifier or maker's signature from an era predating standard practices. The mark appears on approximately 8 of the foundation stones he documented, again concentrated at that one Grant Avenue site. That concentration suggests intentional placement. Intentional marking. Intentional marking of something someone chose to bury. What is remarkable is that the mark appears again, not in San Francisco, but in archival documentation from similar earthquake damage zones elsewhere. A research project conducted by Stanford University in the 1970s, examining structural damage from the 1868 Hayward earthquake, documented a nearly identical mark on stone foundations uncovered in East Oakland. The researcher, a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, noted the similarity to the mark and wondered whether it represented some kind of earlier cultural or architectural tradition. But Harmon's work was never published. Her research notes are archived at Stanford, but the specific file containing her comparison of the Chinatown and Oakland markings is filed under a catalogue number that doesn't appear in any published finding guide. The discovery of that filing error, it was classified under miscellaneous comparative analysis rather than under earthquake damage, or Oakland archaeology, happened in 2003 during a comprehensive archive reorganization. By that time, Harmon was deceased. The pattern that emerges is not a conspiracy precisely, but something more subtle. It is the pattern of institutional decisions not to look too carefully at certain questions. It is the decision to burn the evidence quickly. It is the decision not to examine, not to document, not to publish. It is the creation of deliberate gaps where complete knowledge might have existed. These gaps were filled by bureaucratic language disease prevention, efficient clearing, standard procedures, but the language masks a consistent choice at every institutional level: not to know, not to pursue, not to record, not to allow follow-up investigation. What remains today, still visible in the Grant Avenue area of modern Chinatown, are the buildings that were rebuilt after 1906. Above them, beneath the current street level, are the foundations that Brennan documented. Most have never been examined again. A few were examined in limited ways during routine utilities work, but no comprehensive archaeological survey has been conducted. No systematic documentation exists of what survives beneath the rebuilt district. One basement, owned by a restaurant currently operating on the site, extends deeper than most Chinatown basements. The owner has mentioned to visiting historians that the floor in the deepest portion contains stone that doesn't match the building's documented 1908 construction date. That stone is still there, dark, weathered, carved by someone operating according to a system of meaning that survives only in Brennan's sketches and in the mark that appeared again in Oakland and nowhere else in any documented record. The question that persists is not whether something significant lies beneath Chinatown. The evidence, limited as it is, suggests something does. The question is whether the institutional decision to stop looking, made systematically across multiple levels of government and authority, represents a choice to protect sensitive information or a choice to avoid the disruption that comprehensive knowledge might require. The mark on those stones, the burned layers beneath the burned rubble, the sudden cessation of investigation, these form a pattern that invites hypothesis but resists proof. And that resistance to proof, that systematic avoidance of knowing, is itself a kind of evidence. The room beneath the rebuilt street is still there, still marked with symbols no official account explains, still waiting for a systematic examination that institutional memory seems to have collectively decided will never happen. The question is why that collective decision was made. The question has been waiting since 1906, and nobody in a position of authority has yet provided an answer.